All right, so we are on the sixth of these messages or letters to the 7 churches of Asia Minor. And so here we are on our map. I'll move out of the way so y'all can maybe see at Philadelphia. So if we start in Ephesus and make our way around, we've gone pretty far. Oh, you guys come on in. We've gotten all the way to Philadelphia. Now, in terms of the way that the letters or the messages are organized, it might be helpful to kind of remember back to the way that we outlined these, not each individual one, but all of them, and describe them as being positive or mostly positive, and then negative or mostly negative. So that when you look at these messages, the first one and the last one are both negative. They're pretty negative. The letter to the church, to the believers in Ephesus, says that they've lost their first love. And then the last one, to the church in Laodicea, says that they are lukewarm, and Jesus is going to spit them out of his mouth. All right, so those are pretty negative on the ends. So the outer messages, really negative. Then the second one and the second to last one that we're covering tonight are really the most positive. They're fairly positive, okay? And then in the middle, you have 3 that are a little bit of a mixture, but mostly negative. Mostly negative messages. So you have negative, positive, negative, 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 positive, negative. So they kind of, it's almost like a mirror image if you cut it down the middle, right? And that's how the letters are organized. That's how they're structured. So when we come across these 2 positive messages, they really should grab our attention, because in the midst of these mostly negative letters, we get these 2, the second one and the second to last one, that are positive, at least positive in terms of Jesus' assessment of the church that he's addressing. It doesn't mean that he tells them all good stuff is going to happen. It just, in terms of his assessment of that particular church, it's positive. So for the church in Philadelphia, we get a very positive assessment of them, but we also see that they are facing a lot of difficulties, and there are future difficulties to come. So a positive assessment of a church doesn't mean that there's not bad things happening to them. It just means that they're not being accused of doing bad things. All right? So that's where we are with this letter to the church in Philadelphia. And like all the letters, all the messages, we have an address at the very beginning that prepares us for what we're going to see in the message itself. So here's the address in this first letter. To the angel of the church in Philadelphia write, the words of the Holy One, the true one, who has the key of David, who opens and no one will shut, who shuts and no one opens. As usual, the description of Jesus in the opening address prepares us for the things that Jesus is going to say to the church. And so we get 3 important things told to us about Jesus here. First of all, that he is the Holy One. And that term, Holy One, really carries with it some indications of divinity. It's not a full-blown assertion of Jesus' divinity. We have seen things closer to that in the book of Revelation. Just like the Gospel of John, in the book of Revelation, Jesus does not shy away from the doctrine of Christ's divinity. And this term, the Holy One, is one that is normally reserved for God. So for Jesus to be identified as the Holy One is just another indication in the book of Revelation that John affirms the divine status of Jesus. He's the Holy One. And his holiness is a clue to how he's going to assess the church in Philadelphia. In fact, one of the things that we're going to be told about them is that they have kept his word and not denied his name, so that they themselves reflect the holiness that's characteristic of Jesus, the Holy One. And then he's also called the True One. The True One. And that, of course, reminds us of John 14:6. I am the way, the truth, and the life, right? It's not surprising that John would have this language in here, or that Jesus would use this language in one of John's writings. He's the true one. And then we just read a second ago that they've kept his word. So they've remained faithful to the truth that's revealed in Jesus. So we're getting clues to what's coming in here. But probably the most distinctive thing that's said about Jesus here is that he has the key of David. And this key of David gives him the power or the authority to open. And then nobody can shut whatever he opens. And then who also can shut or close, and no one is able to open it. So the key of David gives him authority or power to open and shut, and no one can overcome that authority or that power. And that's going to be repeated. That business about the key of David is repeated, this opening and closing. If you look down in verse 8, I know your works. Behold, I have set before you an open door, which no one is able to shut. Right? So whatever the key of David is, it gives Jesus the authority to open doorways and keep them open, and then to close doorways and keep them closed. So let me hear your best guesses, or maybe you've studied this and you have a really good idea of what this key of David actually is. What do you think? What do you think's going on here? What is this key of David? Anybody have any thoughts? Lauren?
Is this a reference to like the sheepfold?
To the sheepfold?
The door?
The door and the gate? Yeah. It could be, but I'm not sure that it is. In that you're thinking John 10, yeah. Right? There, Jesus later in that passage identifies himself as the door or the gate. Whereas here, Jesus is simply the one opening and closing the doors. But there might be like a vague reference back to that. I'm not sure. Maybe, yeah. Anybody else got any ideas? Yeah. Certainly, it's highlighting Jesus' descent from David and his right to rule. Certainly, that's what's in view. There's actually a very specific, and I didn't expect anybody to know this. I didn't even think of this when I first read it. It wasn't until I started looking for references to key associated with David that I came across this. But in Isaiah chapter 22, there's a reference to the key of David. So if you want to hold your place in Revelation, we can jump over there. Isaiah chapter 22. And I'll have to explain to you a little bit of the background here of what's going on. Isaiah chapter 22 contains an oracle spoken by the prophet against the city of Jerusalem and some of its leaders. This is happening during the reign of Hezekiah. Hezekiah, by and large, is a good king, okay? And Hezekiah himself is not, he's not the one who receives the brunt of this oracle. In fact, the one who receives sort of the harshest criticism in here is this guy named Shebna. And if you've never heard of him, that's not surprising. He doesn't pop up very often in the Old Testament. But Shebna was, he's referred to as the steward. Does anybody know what a steward is when you're talking about kings? Oftentimes, the steward will take the place of the king. Yeah, if he's incapacitated in some way, or if he's just gone, or if you're in between kings, he'll sometimes take the place of the king. Yeah. The steward is really kind of just under the king in authority and power. All right. If you guys are familiar with the Lord of the Rings, and you remember in the movie you have that crazy guy who's the steward. And the king is kind of incapacitated. He's kind of crazy and mad. And it turns out that the steward is the one making him sick so that he can kind of assert his authority. They're the second in line. They're like the prime minister underneath the king, I guess. It's the best way to describe them. And so he doesn't he possesses a great deal of authority in Jerusalem, Shebna. And he's told that he's going to be removed from being the steward. So if you look, we'll just jump in at verse 17, where this Shebna is being spoken to. It says, "Behold, the Lord will hurl you away violently, O you strong man. He will seize firm hold on you and whirl you around and around and throw you like a ball into a wide land. There you shall die, and there shall be your glorious chariots, you shame of your master's house." That's pretty bad. "I will thrust you from your office, and you will be pulled down from your station. In that day I will call my servant Eliakim, the son of Hilkiah." Now Eliakim is a Levite, so he's of the priestly line, okay? But this Eliakim, the son of Hilkiah, is going to replace Shebna. And he says, "I will clothe him with your robe, and will bind your sash on him, and will commit your authority to his hand. And he shall be a father to the inhabitants of Jerusalem and to the house of Judah. And I will place on his shoulder the key of the house of David. He shall open, and none shall shut. And he shall shut, and none shall open." Clearly, the language in Revelation 3 is coming from here. So that here in Isaiah 22, this business of opening and shutting is language used to describe the authority of one who represents the king. Okay? But Jesus is himself the king. So Jesus is the king from the line of David, and he is claiming for himself in Revelation, he is claiming to have the full authority of the kingship. That's the point, is that he has the authority to do whatever he wants to do. So we shouldn't take opening and shutting too literally in Revelation 3, because it's not even meant literally in Isaiah chapter 22. Right? It's just a way of saying he can do what he wants to do, and you can't stop him. If he wants to open that door over there, you can't make him shut it. And if he wants to close it, you can't force it open. That's the point. So that what Jesus is affirming at the very beginning is that he has full authority and full power. It takes me back to the Great Commission that we're looking at on Sundays, where Jesus says to them, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore, go and make disciples." Well, that's really essentially what Jesus is saying here to the church in Philadelphia. I have all the authority. I have all the power, and no one can stop me. And then he goes on, if we jump down to his commendation of them, he cites this again. We read this, "I've set before you an open door." So Jesus is doing something for the church in Philadelphia. He's opening a door for them. That is, by his own authority, he's declaring that I'm going to do something through you, and nobody's going to stop me. "I've set before you an open door which no one is able to shut." And then he says, and this is why that all this business about him having this kind of power and authority matters. "I know that you have but little power." So here's this group of believers in the city of Philadelphia who they themselves feel small and powerless and insignificant. And to them, Jesus says, it doesn't matter that you're small and that in the eyes of those around you, you're insignificant. That doesn't matter. I have all authority. And if I'm opening a doorway, if I'm saying that I'm going to do something through you, no matter how weak you may be, I'm going to accomplish it through you. And that's really, really good news for us. I think that's one of the most applicable things we're going to read in all of these messages to the 7 churches. Because most of us, I would guess, nobody in this room has an outsized influence on the world around us. Like, we don't have a big reach. My kids make fun of me because I have 2 different YouTube channels. One is just the church one, right? And they laugh at the number of views that my videos get. They think it's hilarious. The one that they really find funny is the YouTube channel I have for Latin. It's just for the Latin classes. And you'll click on a video there. And in the course of teaching at this school now for 6 years, a video might have 20 views. And that's it. Which means not even my own students are looking at my videos. And they think it's hilarious. Which makes it clear that I'm not an influencer. Right? I don't have a large reach out in the world. I don't. None of us does. In fact, our church as a whole, we're a small little church in a fairly large community. There's a lot of people that live here in Atascocita, and we're pretty small. I've been in churches that have Sunday school classes with more people than we have in worship. I'm sure some of you have too. Right? So we're not a big church that's making a huge impact on the culture, at least visibly around us. And that can make us feel like we have but little power. Like what we're doing here is not that significant, and that at the end of it all, it's not really going to change a lot of things around us or influence all that many people. It can feel very much like that. Part of the reason that we're sometimes attracted to bigger things and shinier things is because we just want to be connected to something bigger than us. We just want to be a part of something bigger, even if we're not in charge of it, even if we're not, the face of it. We just like to be connected to something bigger. And the reality is that though we are not ourselves influential in the world, and our church as a whole, we are not a big church doing big things out in the world, nevertheless, Jesus, if he opens doors for us, nobody can shut them. In other words, what he chooses to do through us, no one can stop. And we have to understand that it's not our job to pick the doors. It's not our job to decide what King Jesus wants us to do, or what he wants us to accomplish, or what he wants to do through us as a church or even as individuals. It's not our job to pick those doors. It's just our job to walk through them. It's just our job to be participants in whatever it is that he's choosing to do through us. That's all we have to do. And when we do that, it doesn't matter whether in our own eyes or the eyes of the world, we have but little power. It doesn't matter. You don't have to be remembered. In 100 years, I doubt that anybody will remember any of our names. Think about it. Except for those of you who've done like genealogies and looked at your family tree, most of us don't have a clue who our family members were 100 years ago that were alive, or 200 years ago. We don't know. Like, a lot of us probably don't even know the names of our great-great-grandparents. And we're their direct descendants. You think anybody else remembers them? Like their coworker that they worked next to for 40 years? Do their great-grandchildren have any clue? No, they don't. Most of us will not be remembered in 100 years. And that's okay. That's perfectly fine. If what we're setting out to do is just participate in whatever Jesus is doing. If that's our goal, just to be a part of whatever Jesus is doing, and just to enjoy the benefits of his authority and not our own, then that's perfectly fine. And even as a church, it's okay if in 100 years nobody remembers our church. It's okay. It's okay if we never build a big building that lasts for a long time. It's fine. That's not the point of it. That's not the purpose. That's not what we're trying to do. We're just trying to walk with Christ and do what he commands us to do. And then by his own authority, he will blaze a trail in front of us that will probably lead to our own obscurity. Who cares? It's about him anyway. What matters is whether or not we do these things. He says, you have little power, yet you have kept my word. You have not denied my name. Do you remember the last church we looked at? That we said most likely the problem that was going on there was the fact that that they were probably not openly confessing the name of Jesus. and instead perhaps blending in with the large Jewish population in their city so that they could enjoy perhaps some of the benefits, the special privileges that were afforded by the Roman government to the Jewish people. They weren't forced to participate in idolatrous practices and all of those things. But if you name the name of Christ, it's quite likely that you're going to be kicked out of the synagogue and therefore lose that protection. So, following on the heels of a message to a church that did not openly proclaim the name of Christ, now we have a group of Christians who have not denied my name. They've been faithful. That's what really matters. And they've kept his word, which also takes us back to the Great Commission, right? That part of the Great Commission is we're to teach people to keep, or some translations say obey, the word of Jesus, right? All that I have commanded you. Those are the things we're supposed to keep. And these believers here have kept his word. What are some of the, just off the top of your heads, okay, what are some of the commandments that Jesus gives in the Gospels to his people? Just any of them. Love one another as I've loved you. Okay. There's a bunch of them, I promise. If one pops in your head, it's probably right. You don't have to know the verse reference. Yeah. Well, he tells them, he sends his disciples out, a larger group than just the 12, but he sends them out to go out and preach the gospel or the message of the kingdom in these different cities. He tells them, don't take a money bag, don't take a belt. In other words, don't take extra supplies. You're going to be totally dependent upon the people you preach to. When you show up in a town, if they reject you, don't worry about it. Shake the dust off your feet and move on to the next town. Yeah. So it tells us something about the approach of Jesus to evangelism or outreach, if you want to call it that, whatever you want to call it. He's not concerned with the immediate success. Go out, preach, be totally dependent upon those you preach to help you, and if they don't help you or if they reject you, move on. Yeah, that's a good one. Any others? Judy? Are you talking the commands about our enemies, right? Yeah. Pray for your enemies. Bless them. Don't curse them. Yeah. All good ones. Yeah. If someone strikes you on the cheek, turn and give them the other one. In other words, our posture shouldn't be one of immediate response when somebody attacks us. It's okay. Yeah. Yeah, really important. What's that? Yeah, forgive others as I've forgiven you. Yeah, good. Somebody else said one somewhere. Yeah, abide in me. Yeah. Any more you want to throw out there? Oh yeah, don't point out the speck in your brother's eye until you've gotten the log out of your own. Then you can go do some speck pointing, but deal with your own stuff first. Okay. Anything else? Love your neighbors yourself. There's a bunch of them, right? It's not really all that difficult for us to ask the question, are we keeping his word? I know it's more than just keeping his commandments. I know that. There's a whole lot more. I mean, there's a real sense which the whole Bible is his word. Okay? But just on a very surface level, even if you don't have chapter and verse memorized, you probably know at least half a dozen of the direct commands that Jesus gives us in the Gospels. And so you can just ask yourself, am I keeping his word? Am I retaliating against those immediately when they come against me? Or am I praying for them, blessing them instead of cursing them, turning the other cheek? Like, am I being genuinely loving towards my neighbor and my enemy? Like, all of those things. Are those the kinds of things that characterize our lives? That would tell us whether or not we're keeping his word. So our own personal sense of significance doesn't matter. What matters is that we keep his word and we confess his name publicly. Those are the things that really matter. And that's what Jesus commends the church for. But there's more to this message than just that, because the next thing we have is actually kind of interesting. Because what often follows in these messages, once he says something nice about the church, then he gets down to business and he starts to criticize them. And he starts to warn them about there may be some judgment coming upon you for the things that you've done wrong. But here he doesn't do that. Instead, he moves his attention to their enemies or the people that oppose them. And he says, "Behold, I will make those of the synagogue of Satan, who say that they are Jews and are not, but lie. Behold, I will make them come and bow down before your feet, and they will learn that I have loved you." So who's the synagogue of Satan? What is this? What's going on here? We've talked about this before in another of these messages. It's certainly the Jewish synagogue, no doubt. Probably not. I mean, they'd be distantly related. Yeah, in some sense, the rabbis. Yeah. It's just really, it's just non-Christian Jews. You have to remember that early on, the vast majority of converts to Christianity were Jewish. Now, by the time the book of Revelation is written, it's much more, the church has many, many more Gentiles in it. But you would still have a lot of Jewish people within the church. Quite a few, actually, in most churches. But by and large, the Jewish people in any given town would have rejected the gospel message. That was Paul's normal experience. His normal habit, goes into a city, he goes to the synagogue first, and he preaches the gospel there. And there are a few Jewish converts who believe in Jesus as the Messiah. Eventually, the rest of them get mad at him and kick him out of the synagogue. Then he goes usually to the marketplace or somewhere like that. And he preaches to Gentiles. And then there's Gentiles who are saved. He puts the Jews and Gentiles together into a group called the church. That's Paul's typical mode of operation when he goes into any city. And so we can expect, even though these aren't all churches that Paul established, probably the same basic process going on. So we can probably expect that this church was a mix of Jewish and Gentile believers. And they are being actively rejected and persecuted by non-Christian Jews. We see a lot of that happening in the New Testament. In fact, even outside the New Testament, over the next roughly 100 years, really over the next 50 years, there's going to be a lot of increasing sort of friction between Jewish religious leaders and Christians. A lot of it. In fact, last week do you remember we looked at those 18 benedictions, and we saw that in the version, these were these 18 blessings, Jewish blessings. We saw that in one of the very earliest versions of that would have been used in Israel and probably this area as well, that the 12th benediction is actually not a blessing at all, it's a curse. And those included in the curse are Christians, the Nazarenes. So we're seeing that friction already. There's a whole lot of it. And it oftentimes comes in the form of Jewish persecution of believers. Now, whether or not their persecution is aimed mainly at Jewish Christians, it probably was, or included Gentile Christians, doesn't really matter. Because from the perspective of the New Testament writers, he says that those who reject Christ as the Messiah, they've transformed the synagogue, their meeting place, into a synagogue of Satan. And though they say that they are Jews, they're not. That's pretty strong. Like if we were to write a book and say something like that today, we'd be called anti-Semitic. Thankfully, John is Jewish, and Paul as well. But their point is that those who are the true sons of Abraham are those who believe in Abraham's seed, Jesus. That's the point. so that those who are spiritual Jews are actually Christians. And so this Jewish opposition, Jesus says, well, they say that they're Jews, but because they've rejected me, they're no longer true sons of Abraham, so they're just liars. And he says, don't worry about them, because when I come, they're going to bow down at your feet, and they will learn that I have loved you. Now that's good news. That all those who have opposed us, when they stand before the judge, will learn that the judge loved us. That's good news. Especially if you're a Christian who's enduring severe persecution. Especially if you're among those who you might even be killed for your faith. And to know that there is a day that is coming, that is guaranteed, in which those who came against you and persecuted you and perhaps even killed you, that they will come to recognize that the one who's judging them in that day loved you. That's really good news. It's really encouraging for us. And for what's interesting for the church at Philadelphia is what's promised to them is not deliverance from the problems that are right in front of them. They're not promised that at all. Instead, what they're promised is on that day, in the minute we actually get the language of hour, that day, not only will you be safe and secure, but those who oppose you now will come to recognize that I love you. There's no better news than that for us. That no matter what opposition we face, even if there's never an end to it in this life, we never see our enemies get theirs in this life. It's coming a day, and they will long to be among those loved by Jesus. But we'll actually be those loved by Jesus. He goes on and he says, because you've kept my word about patient endurance, now here it is, I will keep you from the hour of trial that is coming upon the whole world to try those who dwell on the earth. Now there's some debate about what this is, the hour of trial that's coming upon the whole world. I think it's just a reference to Judgment Day. Most of the time when we have hour or day singular, it's in these kinds of contexts, it's in reference to the final judgment. And so what I think he's saying is it's just a continuation of what he said. They're going to come to see that I love you. And now he's saying, in that time, in that hour of trial, it's coming on the whole world. Everybody's coming under the judgment. I'm going to keep you. I'm going to keep you safe. Well, I mean, that's the whole point of salvation, right? What are we being saved from? The wrath of God. Yeah.
Are you saying that there's some other opinions on what that means?
Yeah, so there are some who think that this is a reference to the future Great Tribulation. There's places in the New Testament where you have a reference to a Great Tribulation. And so some will argue that this hour of trial is a period of great tribulation and trouble. And still some, so smaller category, who hold to that view. Some would also say that his keeping them from that hour of trial is the rapture, where he's going to take them out of the world before all that happens, and they won't have to worry about it. But again, usually this language of hour, particularly in the singular, is a reference to the final judgment. And so I don't want to read into this something that I don't find anywhere in the book of Revelation. I don't find anywhere in the book of Revelation that we will be spared suffering in this world. What I find is that we will be rescued from the coming judgment. So I think that's probably what it is. But there are a lot who think it is a reference to the rapture and the Great Tribulation. It's a good question. So that's the promise here. There's two separate promises in this particular message, but that's the first promise, that he's going to keep and protect us from that. Now, like everywhere in all these messages, that comes through patient endurance. Genuine faith endures. That's the consistent message throughout Revelation, and especially in these 7 messages, that you have to endure, continue to believe, remain faithful to Christ, and you will escape the judgment. That's the first promise. Then we get this little brief encouragement. Yes? Yeah, I think so. Yeah, you have several references in the book of Revelation to those who dwell on the earth. You have the kings of the earth, the kings who dwell on the earth. And whenever we see those phrases, it's usually in the midst of God's judgment falling upon them. Yeah. Any other questions about this first promise? All right, so then we get this little brief encouragement. I'm watching my watch to try to make sure I don't go over. I have a bad habit of doing that. He says, so that I am coming soon, and we've talked about this language of soon before. Lots of different interpretations of it. But I said to you that I think that this reflects common, sort of standard apocalyptic language about the judgment. That it is always to be considered soon. And we don't know when. Okay? So soon could be literally in 5 seconds, or soon could be in 1,000 years. Or so far we're over 2,000 years and counting. So I'm coming soon. Hold fast what you have so that no one may seize your crown. This is just an encouragement to do what he's already described here. Because you've kept my word about patient endurance. So he's saying continue to endure, right? Hold fast so that no one may seize your crown. Remember, he's already promised that their enemies will bow down at their feet. Now he's saying, don't give up. Don't walk away from the faith. Endure, remain faithful, continue to believe, and your crown will be secure. So one of the constant sort of repetitive emphases of Revelation is about this, the necessity of endurance. That faith, genuine, real faith, is not just a one-time commitment, but it's trust that continues. And so he says to them, keep on. Just keep on. Don't let anybody try to take your crown away from you. That is, don't walk away. And then the second promise starts the way that all of the final promise in these messages begin. To the one who conquers, I will make him a pillar in the temple of my God. Now there have been some who have said, oh, see, John makes a reference to the temple here. So the temple must still be standing when he writes the book of Revelation. We know that the temple was destroyed in 70 A.D. The Romans came in. They set up a siege around Jerusalem in 66 A.D. They got through the walls in 70 A.D. and they tore it stone from stone, just as Jesus predicted. Not one stone was left on another. The temple was completely destroyed. 70 A.D. So some would look at this reference to the temple and say, well, the temple must still be standing when John's writing, and so they would place the book of Revelation much earlier. And I've said I think it's written probably in the 90s. What I think this is a reference to is not the literal temple in Jerusalem, but I think it's another reference, another way of referring to the new heavens and new earth, or the new Jerusalem, where Jesus dwells among them, and the whole new Jerusalem, or the whole new creation, is a temple. The whole thing's become a temple at the end of the book of Revelation. So you don't have a temple structure that's built in the new heavens and new earth. It's all temple, which was the original sort of goal of Eden. Eden is described in language that makes it sound like a kind of temple. And the job of Adam and Eve was sort of to spread out, with their descendants, and expand the borders of this garden until the whole world becomes a garden temple. They never did it. They didn't expand it at all. But there's going to come a time when the whole world is made new and it's all a temple. And so I think that's what what Jesus has in mind here when he says, I will make the one who conquers a pillar in the temple of my God. It's guaranteeing you a place in the new heavens and new earth. Never shall he go out of it. And I will write on him the name of my God and the name of the city of my God, the New Jerusalem, which comes down from my God out of heaven, and my own new name. So if you turn actually in your Bibles to the end of the book of, near the end of the book of Revelation, chapter 21. This is where you see all of this business about the New Jerusalem. Revelation 21, verse 1. Then I saw a new heaven and new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more. And I saw the holy city, the New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. That's really important because it helps us to remember this is not a literal city. The New Jerusalem is the church, the people of God. A bride adorned for her husband. Jesus is the husband. So John has this vision. He sees the New Jerusalem, which represents the church, coming down from heaven. And then he heard a loud voice from the throne saying, "Behold, the dwelling place of God is with man. He will dwell with them, and they will be his people." The dwelling place of God is temple language. If you remember from the Gospel of John, chapter 1, verse 14, the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. That word dwell means tabernacled. Tabernacle being the portable temple before they built the permanent temple, or semi-permanent temple at least. And so now the church has come down to the new heavens and new earth to dwell on it with Jesus, and the whole place, because of Jesus' presence, the whole place has become the dwelling place of God. So going back to our passage, right? That's what's in view here. That those who conquer, those who endure, will become a pillar in the temple of God, and they'll never be sent out of it, right? His name, he's going to write on him the name of God, the name of the city, the New Jerusalem, and his own new name. We've talked a little bit about that name stuff, and we'll get back to it towards the end of Revelation. There's going to be a lot about name in the last few chapters. But the point of the name is to say that you're marked out as his own. That's the point, okay? You're marked out as his. And this is permanently forever. That's the goal. And then the way they all end, he who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. Questions and comments for the last few minutes? Yes, did I skip over anything that you're curious about? Uh-huh. No, I think in Revelation, usually those who dwell on the earth is a reference to non-believers. So we have the kings who dwell on the earth, and they're coming under judgment. Those types of things, yeah. And you can always check this stuff. There's plenty of sort of online Bible search things, and some different Bible apps will allow you to do word searches. And so you can search for things like dwell in the book of Revelation and see how many times you have a reference to dwelling on the earth, or you can just look at the earth and see how many times you have a reference to people on the earth in Revelation. And that's how you can get a sense of what's this language refer to. But I think it's a way of referring basically to non-Christians and people who come under judgment. Any other questions? Okay. A whole 2 minutes early. I'll pray, and then you'll be free. Father, I thank you for this book, Revelation. I thank you for this message to the church at Philadelphia. And I pray for those of us who feel insignificant, that you would remind us that what matters is what you are doing. And what matters is not that people would remember our name, but that the name of Jesus would be remembered, and that name would be written upon us forever. And so I pray that this would be an encouragement to us not to give up or not to grow tired of doing the things that you've called us to do, but to be encouraged. Because Jesus has all authority and all power. And whatever it is He set out for us to do, He has the authority to make it happen through us. So help us to be encouraged by that, and help us to be emboldened to go out and carry out the mission that you've given to us. We pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.